Hi there, BookTube. It's time for a scallydandle. Scallydandling videos are when I talk about a book that I've read as part of my long-term personal challenge to read a book by an author from every country in the world. And this time, the country is Eswatini, previously known as Swaziland. And the author is Malla Nunn. She now lives in Australia, but she was born and brought up there. And the book is When the Ground is Hard, which was published in 2019. It's a YA novel, and it got some, significant kind of credits and awards as a good example of YA. I would say that there are three groups of people who might be interested in hearing more about this book. So you stick around if you're in one of these three groups. Number one would be anyone who's just particularly interested in Eswatini and life there, looking back to like the 1960s when it was still Swaziland. Number two would be anyone doing a Reading Around the World challenge, because there's not a lot of options to read of readily available books from authors from Eswatini. So you're likely to be considering Malla Nunn as one of your most likely options. But the third group, I would say, would be anyone who likes a really good quality young adult novel. Now, I'm not a big reader of YA, but I know lots of people are, and I think this is a good example of the genre. So, and particularly if you enjoy a novel with a school setting, a boarding school setting, which creates a kind of particularly intense world where children or young people are away from home and family. And, I think it's a thing. Well, I've been told it's a thing by Sean the Book Maniac and his bookish friend Erica, who made a video about it just a few weeks ago. I'll share the link below. So we always start these scallydandles with a little bit of geography and history. So let's look at where to find Eswatini. Now, here's Africa. Okay, it's down in southern Africa. It's so small that you can't see it, so you just have to trust me that it's about there. So it's got South Africa all round it, apart from one little bit of its border that is a border with Mozambique. It's completely landlocked. It's small, so small you can't really see it on here. It's actually about 120 miles one way and 80 miles the other, really compact. Similar size country would be Kuwait, say. But despite that, it's very varied landscape, because you've got mountains on one side and then sort of gradually goes down through high veld, low veld, sort of bush country, grasslands. But as I say, no coastline. It's small in population as well. About 1.2 million people live there, mixed, mainly Swazi speakers, also some Zulu, but still some white Europeans as well. And fairly poor developing nation. There's very much commercial agriculture and some manufacturing, but about 3/4 of the population are living through subsistence agriculture. Commercial agriculture, a lot of it is sugarcane, and they do export to Europe and so on. But their biggest sort of, they're very much within, I would say, the economic sphere of influence of South Africa, quite dependent on South Africa, including workers from Eswatini going and working there and getting remittances, sending remittances home. So yeah, gives you a flavour. One interesting and different thing about Eswatini is that it's one of the few places in the world that still has an absolute monarch, a king. The king at the moment is called Mswati III. And there is a sort of elected parliament and council of, advisors and so on, but he is an absolute monarch. Another interesting thing that I didn't know about monarchs in Eswatini is that the king traditionally rules alongside his mother, or if his mother dies, a sort of nominated senior female relative. And she's not queen, she's the Undluvukati, which means she elephant. So the king is known as the lion, and the queen, in so to speak, is the she elephant, and he has kind of like the political role, and hers is more sort of spiritual and cultural, and that's a long tradition. But also those queen mothers would typically act as regent, queen regent, and there's been a number of queen regents in sort of Eswatini's history. So, yeah, who knew? Well, lots of people probably did, but I didn't. A little bit of history. Well, Southern Africa obviously has, extraordinary long, complicated and interesting prehistory. It was one of the places where Homo sapiens sort of originated, Southern Africa and East Africa. But moving into more familiar, when we start to know a bit more about it, there was Khoisan hunter-gatherers there, but then they were kind of pushed out by those waves of Bantu migrations from the sort of north and east of the African continent. We've come across that in previous scallydandling videos. It's a bit unclear, but basically, sort of agriculturalists and pastoralists that sort of pushed down and pushed out the hunter-gatherers for the most part. The actual Swazi, as we call them now, conquered the area that broadly corresponds to modern Eswatini in the 18th century. And Eswatini actually takes its name, and the Swazi take their name from one of their great fighting kings, Mswati II, who was ruler in the mid-19th century and really expanded the country to sort of 2 or 3 times the size it is now. That was also the period of first contact with Europeans and European settlers. And in the late 19th century scramble for Africa, Eswatini could have disappeared, but it didn't. The king at the time was canny in fighting or supporting, British interests, and was recognised. So Eswatini was recognised as a sort of independent monarchy. Never became a British possession, although from 1906 it was kind of like a British protectorate, so under the British sphere of influence, but with a degree of autonomy. The King Sobhuza II kind of basically managed to avoid being absorbed by South Africa, which is what could very well have happened, and sustained Eswatini all the way through to independence in 1968. He ruled an amazing nearly 83 years, from 1899 to 1982. That is actually the longest known, reign of a monarch anywhere in the world in history. I mean, ones where we've got definite dates for, as it were. His mother was regent for the first chunk of his reign, but yeah, there. Quite a man, apparently. And as I say, he manoeuvred it to independence, and the British kind of tried to sort of impose a sort of British style parliamentary democracy, and he kind of undid that. So, and he would still have been king when Malla Nunn was a child in Swaziland. It became Eswatini, and I don't know when she was born. I've had a good search on the internet, couldn't find it anywhere. It's obviously something she likes to keep quiet, but what we do know is that sometime in the 1970s, she moved with her family to Australia, and she was certainly well into her teens by that point, because one of the things that she does share is that she went to a boarding school, secondary school in Eswatini. School still exists, but that was set up for mixed race children at that time, different now, obviously. And that is something that she has in common with Adele, the heroine, main protagonist of When the Ground is Hard. So, and so she was drawing on her own experience as a schoolgirl at boarding school, and the school that is the centre, where the setting of the novel is based on the school that she attended. Now, the fact that Swaziland, as it was, managed to avoid being absorbed into South Africa in the 20th century doesn't mean that it was immune to the impact of apartheid. As a British protectorate, although not a possession, European settlers had a privileged role in the country, and were a lot of the sort of good land was reserved for European settlers to use to exploit. And this had an impact on the sort of what would you say, kind of the way Swazi society worked. So where white Europeans were very much at the top of the tree, there was a kind of a colorism, similar to that you saw in South Africa, where kind of mixed race, what were often referred to then as coloured people, kind of saw themselves as being socially superior to black Swazis, and there was also a Zulu minority, and so there's almost like it was like a kind of a tripartite hierarchy in the society then, and that is absolutely central to this novel, and is what Malla Nunn and her family were wanting to get away from when they moved to Australia, but is something that she obviously really wants to explore in this novel. So Adele, our heroine, her father loves her mother, loves Adele and her brother, but is only ever a visitor in their lives. He lives in Johannesburg, and he will always prioritise his white wife and his white children over Adele and her brother and her mother. This is, I don't know, that's the sort of the key, is the defining kind of element of Adele's life, I guess. Now, her father supports the family, and he pays for her fees to attend this say mixed race boarding school, and in the story, it's 1965. Adele is now 16. She's been going to this boarding school for some time. It's in the manner of boarding schools everywhere in literature and in reality. I think the school has a really strong social hierarchy, in amongst the pupils. So there's nice teachers, nasty teachers, and that. But actually, what kind of almost impacts the pupils the most is their relationships with each other. And that is sort of overlaid in this case by sort of not just how well off they are or how popular they are, but how white or black or they are. That's part of that, and Nunn is quite kind of frank in sort of exploring that. Adele has been part of the popular girls clique, but she comes back to a new term and finds herself pushed out by a wealthier, whiter new pupil, and she finds herself sort of paired up with and pushed on another girl called Lottie, who is poorer, significantly poorer than her, but a really bold, feisty character, real independent spirit with a strong moral compass. and there's a sort of a sort of almost typical story of, they don't get on, Adele doesn't like her, but then starts to see the good in her and make connection. They make connections. In fact, they connect over a copy of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte that they end up reading together. Obviously, a storyline guaranteed to appeal to me and many other lovers of Jane Eyre and Charlotte Bronte. And, adventures ensue. They get to take a heroic role in a school emergency, and Adele learns some significant family secrets that help her kind of get a new sense of her identity, I guess, and a new understanding of where she's from and where she belongs and what matters. It's as you gather from that, it's YA fiction at its strongest, I think. I'm not a great connoisseur of YA, but obviously I read it as a child, I guess, or young adult myself, and what I appreciate, I suppose, is that this book, it's got universal teenage emotions in it, but also a context of bigger issues, and a relatively sort of feel-good resolution. So, I would happily share it with a young teen. I would give it as a gift, say. The story arc is moderately predictable, I guess, but the setting absolutely is not predictable in any way for me. It was very fresh, very interesting. And Malla Nunn's first career before she became a writer was as a filmmaker, and I think you really see that in the book. She can build her setting. It's quite visual. How you can see it and feel it. There's strong dialogue, kind of some bold plot lines that have some coincidences in them, but they work. And so as I say, I would quite enthusiastically recommend this book. It's not a 5-star book for me because a YA book is probably never going to be that, but I would certainly recommend it as a YA book and as a book to read if you want to read something by an author from Eswatini. Nunn has also written some adult crime novels, and I would have been tempted to read one of those, but she's chosen to set those in South Africa. I can understand why, but I would guess I wanted, if I could, to read something that was also set in Eswatini, as this is. And so I would love to hear if anyone else out there has read it and share some thoughts, what you thought of it. But before I go, I'm going to share the proverb from where the book gets its title. So the book's title is When the Ground is Hard, and the proverb is, and I love this, when the ground is hard, the women dance. And that really does convey, I suppose, the spirit of this book.